everyone, thank you for joining us. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes whilst everybody logs on and joins us for this very exciting author event we've got with our two lovely authors who have joined us this morning. So I hope you're looking forward to hearing more from them, all about their books and what it's like to be a children's author. And we will be starting in the next kind of 30 seconds or so. So make sure you're comfortable and have some great questions prepared.
I love questions.
we love questions, and you can ask us about anything other than we love weird questions is what I'm going to say. You can ask us anything apart from deeply personal questions.
I'm sure we'll have lots of great questions coming. Cool, so we're a couple of minutes in already. There were some slight connection issues at the start that we've got over now, thankfully. So I think we will probably kick off. So hi everybody, my name is Zoe and I work for a national charity called the Reading Agency, which tackles life's big challenges through the proven power of reading. And we're so excited to welcome you to this very special virtual school visit from authors Anna James and Nicola Skinner. So Anna and Nicola will be discussing their new books, where they find their inspiration, how they became authors, and what it's actually like to be an author, as well as much, much more that they've got prepared. They'll also be answering your questions, which is super exciting. So if you do have a question, you or your teacher can write it in the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. And Anna and Nicola will answer as many of these as they can at the end of the event. You can also use the Q&A box to ask Anna and Nicola any book recommendations you might have. So maybe you recently read a book set in the past and you would like to read another historical book, or maybe you really love space and you want to find a book set in another galaxy. So whatever the book is that you're looking for, you can share your requests in the Q&A box, and Anna and Nicola will give you their favourite recommendations. So before we start, I will introduce our two lovely authors. So Anna James is a writer and journalist living in London. She was shortlisted for the Kim Scott Woolwin Award for Women in Publishing in 2015 and the London Book Fair Trailblazers Award in 2016. Anna is the author of the Pages & Co series, which celebrates all that is best in life: books, adventure, friendship and cake. She'll be talking about the latest book in the series, which is called Tilly and the Map of Stories, in which Tilly heads to America to save book wandering, which is the magical ability to jump right into the pages of a book. Nicola Skinner worked as a copywriter and a journalist before being inspired to write Bloom, which was her first book for children. And it was also longlisted for both the Blue Peter Book Award and the Branford Boase Book Award. And it also won the North Somerset Book Award. She'll be talking about her latest book, Starboard, which is about an apparently happy and successful 11-year-old YouTube star who meets a ship that comes alive. So without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to Anna and Nicola.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was very lovely, thorough introduction. I think we were planning on doing some introductions, but I don't think I've done anything else that wasn't mentioned there. But yeah, so hello, welcome. Thank you so much to everyone joining us. I believe we have quite a lot of schools watching, and we're so pleased that you've joined us. I hope you find this interesting. As Zoe said, I'm the author of the Pages & Co series. So the first one is Tilly and the Book Wanderers, the red one. The second one is Tilly and the Lost Fairy Tales, which is the blue one. And the most recent one is Tilly and the Map of Stories, pink one, which has just come out in paperback. And book 4, The Book Smugglers, is coming out in September. Before I was an author, thanks. Before I was an author, I've done all sorts of bookish jobs. I was a school librarian. I was a books journalist, so I wrote about books and interviewed authors for newspapers and magazines. I've been a literary scout. I've done all sorts of bookish jobs, and now I am writing books. So that is me quickly. Nicola, do you want to add anything to your introduction?
Well, I mean, Zoe, you just made me sound amazing. I was just sitting back thinking, wow. So I took a while to get into becoming an author. I had lots of different jobs. I went to university, and then after that I worked in a pub. I was a barmaid for a bit. I did a lot of sales calls where I was on the phone a lot. And then I gradually kind of worked my way into writing jobs. So I was a journalist and I wrote a lot for women's magazines. And then I worked in advertising a little bit. And then one day I was sitting in my garden with my daughter and I had an idea for a story, and I suddenly went, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the idea I've been looking for my entire life. And that turned out to be Bloom, which is about a girl who finds a mysterious packet of seeds buried in her back garden. And then after that, I wrote a ghost story called Storm, which is about a girl who becomes a ghost and then becomes a ghost on an actual ghost ride or ghost train. And now I've just got my third book out, which is Starboard.
And we are going to talk a little bit about where we get ideas from. Nicola mentioned the garden and the seeds, because I think that when we talk to schools, one of the questions we get asked the most is where we get our ideas from, where we get our inspiration from. So we are going to talk a bit about that. But I thought also we could just say that Nicola and I are both published by HarperCollins Children's Books, and we're also, as advertised, friends in real life.
I know!
We say in real life, we've actually only met each other in real life once because we're pandemic friends.
We are.
We have met in a car park in Cirencester once, and have been chatting ever since then. And it's really nice to have author pals, and I think we're going to talk a bit more, and we're also happy for you to ask questions about if there's anything you want to know about kind of behind the scenes, what it's like really being an author. But we're going to talk about a bit about that as well. So perhaps we shall start with where we get our ideas from, as that is something that we get asked a lot, but I also find it really interesting. I love hearing from other authors kind of where this seeds, like, you know, literal seeds for Nicola, but where those seeds of the ideas come from. So you talked about where Bloom came from. Did you have like a really specific moment of inspiration for Storm and Starboard as well, or did they kind of evolve a bit more gradually?
I think my ideas always come kind of sideways. I get a tiny glimmer, that question that I think you probably get asked to think about quite a lot if you're writing, which is what if? And then for me, it's just an idea, but a tiny fragment of an idea. I don't know about you, Anna. I very rarely see the whole story before I start writing. But I'll be captured perhaps by a scene. So with Storm, I definitely had like almost a vision of a child seeing people coming into her house and treating it like a museum. And that was it. That was the only thing I knew. I think sometimes when you write a story, it's actually to answer a question for yourself. And probably that question will always be, why would that scene be there? And then the rest of the story is to answer that. With Bloom is the one story where I could see the beginning and the middle and the end the most. And then with Starboard, that took ages. I just knew that I wanted to write about a ship. I had no idea what else to write about. But that's the beauty of writing, isn't it? Is you don't know what's inside you until you start to write. Mm-hmm. So and that's how you'll get your ideas, I suppose. What about you, Anna? Where, like, I know that Anna was a librarian for quite some time. Is that where you got the idea for Pages and Co?
I think that the concept of like book wandering is just rooted in me. I think I've always worked with books and I've always been such a huge reader. It's always been the thing that I would most want to do. Like the magic I most wish was real, the superpower I wish I had was to travel inside of books. I've always been fascinated as well about the way that the books we love shape us as people and what we pull from books. And I think that's especially potent, the books we read when we're young. I feel like some of the books I read when I was kind of between 10 and 18 are the books that had really the biggest and most profound impact on me as a reader and as a person and as a writer. And I'm always fascinated by how we can all read the same books with the same words written down, and they can mean completely different things to us based on who we are and our life experiences. but the whole book wandering thing, so it's really rooted in that. And I think being a librarian kind of not specifically inspired it, but again, it was just seeing the power of books on lots of young readers. It was just really reinforcing that is really powerful and magical, and helping young readers find books that really turn them into readers or had a real big impact on them was really powerful. I think it's also slightly different for me writing a series, of course, because once I have that core book one concept, it's a very different thing, I think, coming up with a kind of concept and vibe for each book. I do like each book to have its own feel. So the first one is very like London, cozy bookshops. The second one's all about, and it's got classics, kind of like Alice and Anne of Green Gables. Then the second one is Paris and fairy tales. The third one is like America and kind of more abstract story stuff. The fourth one, which I can't talk loads about, but the fourth one is very much about like trains. And then actually I can say this because it's literally on the cover, which we revealed, they go to Venice.
I feel before you talk about the fourth one, there may be some children that are watching this that don't know exactly what the book wanderers do. So why don't you just briefly tell us about that and then tell us about the fourth one?
So book wandering is, as Zoe mentioned, it's the magic that means that you can travel inside of books. So my heroine is a girl called Tilly, and in the first 3 books, her and her best friend Oscar are exploring the world of book wandering. They realize that they're book wanderers when characters start popping up in the bookshop where Tilly lives. So Pages and Co, the name of the series, is the name of the bookshop that Tilly lives in with her grandparents, and there's some family secrets and book wandering shenanigans, and they go inside everywhere from, as I mentioned, like fairy tales to Shakespeare plays to Anne of Green Gables to Alice in Wonderland to Treasure Island, and Tilly learns a lot about who she is and kind of her family history, and there's lots of adventures and treasure hunts and such like as they track down. Obviously things start to go wrong in the book wandering world. People start to break stories apart on purpose to steal the book magic. So the kind of
that's just amazing, just like the breaking, like the fact that each book actually contains magic and you can see it, and then when things start to go wrong, it's just such an amazing concept, being able to actually wander in and out of books. And I'm sure that there'll be loads of children hopefully watching this, if they haven't read it, they'll be like, oh my gosh.
I mean, it's just the dream. I think that the fun thing about being a writer, I don't know, for me, a lot of it is essentially wish fulfillment. You know, like I write the things I wish were real. I write the things like Pages and Co is the bookshop I wish I owned. Book wandering is what I wish I could do. And I think a lot of it is to do with, it's bringing things to life that I wish were real. And book magic, like, it's imagination, essentially, book magic. And you know, I get very earnest about it, but it is just, I really do think that the imagination is the closest thing we do have to magic. And I think that making that into like a real physical thing in the books, it was just such fun for me to kind of imagine what happens if imagination was a literal magical force and a physical thing that you could manipulate. Like what would people do with it for good and for bad, and what would people make? And I'm just endlessly fascinated by stories and how they work, and Pages and Co is essentially just a celebration of books and how they work and imagination, and that it's magic.
Love that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, so obviously you've written an entire series, so you're going into your 4th book. It's set, you know, with I know some of your characters you're saying goodbye to a few characters, but some of your heroines staying the same. And what are the challenges of maintaining a series?
So I don't do very in-depth planning. And the way that publishing works means that I haven't necessarily always known exactly how many books are going to be in the Pages and Co series, which means planning the overall story sometimes has been a kind of something that has had its challenges in wanting to keep, which is part of the reason as well that there's a bit of a pause. So if you've read the first 3 books, you'll know that there's a fairly conclusive ending to a lot of what's going on at the end of book 3. And then book 4 picks up some of the stuff, and as Nicola said, Tilly's in it, but she actually shares the story with another character. It's told half in Tilly's perspective, half in the perspective of a character that we meet in book 3. and I wanted to use that so you if you haven't read any of the books, you could pick them up at book 4. You could start at book 4. That's very much like a new arc, and that's also a way that means I can keep a handle on it and make sure that I'm writing good stories that I can have some control and plan over. I must admit, I am led by, it's interesting what you said about visuals, because I really am like a visual ideas person. Like I like massively almost always start with images of very specific scenes and places and sort of set pieces, for want of a better word, that I want to incorporate. And I would rather do a bit of retconning of how the magic works in the plot than sacrifice a scene that I think is a great scene. I want the books to be really enjoyable and fast-paced and like great adventures. And so
it's interesting, isn't it, how some it's interesting that some people, I think kids watching this, some people, if they write, they might start with a scene, and some might start with a character inside their heads, or you might just have like a tiny fragment of dialogue or a conversation that you overhear and you think, oh, you know, that's what I want. But I'm always really interested. Different authors have such different ideas in terms of your way in, like starting it and then maintaining that energy of writing a book, which is it's a marathon.
And I think for young writers who are watching, it's really important to embrace, obviously when you're in school you're learning different ways of writing and telling stories, and it's great to practice different ways and try out different ways, because if you don't try different ways of writing and different ways of, you know, learning about words and stories and structures, that's how you work out what works for you. So it's important to try all the different things and to
definitely.
But once you hit on, like, embrace how you work. One of my old editors said that basically in her experience, writers either start with like a very specific idea and plan, and then they spiral outwards and it gets bigger as they write. And some people start with like a big kind of concept and vibes, and they spiral inwards as they write. And I'm very much the latter. I start with kind of feelings and vibes and some pictures, and as I write I tighten it and I get smaller. And Rachel, my former editor, she was just saying you just have to embrace how you write. Because if you try and do it differently, you will write worse, basically. And I thought that was really interesting, and I thought it was found it empowering to, because I used to feel very guilty that I didn't do very detailed plans, and I was like, maybe I should make myself do that. And I absolutely do have a plan, but it's quite it's often focused on the scenes that I want to write or how I want characters to feel. And I think that writing is, I don't know if you feel this, I feel like it's been me learning how to marry like my instinctive, what I do instinctively, with learning more about how to tell stories and how to structure them. And I don't know if young writers watching feel that as well, like when you're at school you've got all your big ideas and then you've got to marry that with how to actually get them down on the page. But it's really satisfying to learn how to do that and to work out the best way to tell the stories that you want to tell.
Yeah, definitely. And it's an ongoing process. I mean, you know, I don't think you ever fully crack a solution. It's not like a mathematical formula. You know, and this might come as some relief to some people, but people that are on their 5th or 6th or 7th book still say, I have no idea what I'm doing. But I think for me, when I first start a book, because obviously we're slightly different, because each time I write a book, it's brand new characters, or maybe they're not, I don't know. Maybe they all have something in common. Maybe they're all based on me. But essentially, I every time I start a book, I don't really know who I'm writing about for quite some time. They're complete strangers to me, and I kind of know where I want them to go in the plot. But sometimes I feel like I'm just moving lifeless mannequins around. And that can be really hard, and then you're kind of tempted to abandon the story. But then I just keep thinking about the story, and then I keep writing stubbornly, and then they spark into life. And I think once you fall in love with your character, or love them like a friend or someone that you really care about, I think you really need to care about your characters. I think that's the golden rule, really, more than anything. Then you want to give them a really good story. You want to give them action, and you want to give them excitement, and you want to make things a bit tough for them as well, because, you know, I think that's where they show their true colours.
Do you want to, why don't you tell us a bit about Kristen? I'm trying to make her more American than she is.
Kristen.
And then maybe see on to giving us a bit of a reading from Starboard.
I'd love to do that. Thank you. So Kirsten is my heroine in Starboard. You can just see her there. She's in her school uniform, and Kirsten, on the face of it, she has everything that a child could possibly want. She's very famous. She's a famous reality TV star, which means that she's filmed just for who she is. She doesn't play a role. So she has a camera crew coming into her house pretty much every day. And she kind of accidentally became famous when she was 8. And now she's 11. She's had 3 years of fame. And, you know, she's very rich and successful. But she's, the first time we meet her, I think we realised that she's perhaps not as happy as she could be. And she's lost touch with that. And we first meet her when she goes on a school trip to an old Victorian ship that has been around the world 33 times, but it's very, very old now, and it's just a museum ship. But the moment that she and the ship meet each other, there's this kind of chemistry, and the ship wakes up essentially and thinks, this is my next captain, and we need to leave this city. We need to set off for the high seas. And they both help each other come to terms with things that have happened in their pasts. So the bit I'm going to read to you, is it my time to read now? Yeah! The bit I'm going to read is when Kirsten, it's right at the beginning of Starboard, when Kirsten Bramble gets off the school coach and she walks through the gift shop, and she comes face to face with the ship, which is the SS Great Britain. This was my favourite bit to write, and I'm really describing how I feel whenever I see the ship. It was so glossy, it seemed to drink in all the light around it and radiate it back, so that the ship was practically glowing. Her fingers twitched again. Kirsten looked around. All of her classmates had gone on ahead. None of them had waited for her. She looked back up at the ship's shiny hull and sighed. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of someone coughing. Looks like you've got it almost as badly as me, said a short man abruptly. Marvellous, isn't she? She, said Kirsten, spinning round to look at the man. Where had he come from? He hadn't been there a moment ago. Oh, yes, he said, staring at Kirsten with dark, clever eyes. She. It's the first and most important lesson of seafaring. All ships are she. And this one, I'm sure you'll agree, is more she than most. All 3,000 tons of her. Right, she stammered. Have we met before? The man had a face she could have sworn she'd seen somewhere. It was his eyebrows and sideburns. Not to mention his tall black hat. Very familiar. He looked significant. Have we met? He said. Anything is possible with the right calculations. I don't like to rule anything out. He tucked his hands into the pockets of his waistcoat, rocked back on scuffed brown boots, and looked up at the ship. Almost alive, isn't she? Kirsten said nothing, because that was exactly what she'd been thinking. She half expected to see the ship's sides gently moving in and out. Together, she and the funny, short little man gazed at the SS Great Britain in silent appreciation. There were 6 tall masts sticking out from the ship's huge deck. They had flags strung between them, and as these fluttered and flapped in the breeze, it was honestly as if the ship was tossing her hair and peering around for someone to dazzle and charm. This ship seemed to flick away the ship in the book as easily as a panther swatting away a fly, as if to say, me? History? Are you sure?
Yay!
Yeah, so what were we talking about? We were talking about
writing and stories and characters.
I would like you, well, would you like to do a reading from from the book Smugglers.
Oh no, that is the fourth book that's not out yet. That I will
we can't talk about that one. Sorry.
No, we can talk about it, but I'm not going to do a reading from it. It's still it's in publishing terms, it hasn't had a line edit yet. So for people watching, books, we write a first draft and it's very messy, and then we get a lot of help with it, and we spend a lot of time working on it and fixing the plot and moving things around and working out who our characters are and what they want. And then once the book is essentially done, something called a line edit happens, and that's when you go through the book line by line. That's why it's called that, and you really look at it in terms of the writing quality. So a lot of the beginning edits are due with the plot and the character, and then once that's set, you start looking at the language and the sentences, and you go through and you make it really good. And that's also when I make sure, like, my characters, their voices are very clear, but I haven't done that stage yet, so it's not ready to be read out loud because it's still a bit clunky, shall we say, and some of the characters sound a bit wrong still, but I'll do a reading from the first book.
Oh yes, that's what I meant. Sorry.
And also because it's a series, I never really know. I assume there's people, because we've got so many schools watching, I'm assuming there's people probably, or people who have literally never heard of the books, people who've read all three, and probably some people who are somewhere in between. So to avoid spoilers, I'm going to do a bit of a reading from the first one, from Tilly and the Book Wanderers. And this is the very first time that Tilly book wanders, and Alice, as in Alice in Wonderland, has popped up in the bookshop and asked Tilly if she wants to go to a tea party. And this is the very first time that she's book wandered. Yes, so, and this is where she ends up.
Yay!
I'm just going to have a little sip of water. Tilly's stomach dropped like the moment you go over the top of a roller coaster, and there was a smell of marshmallows toasting on a bonfire. Instead of the familiar bookshop, Tilly and Alice were standing in a colourful forest with a thatched house tucked into the trees and a long table set out in front of it. At one end of the table sat a large hare in a bow tie, a dormouse who seemed to be asleep, and a man wearing a rather mad-looking hat. "Oh, you were talking about this tea party," Tilly said a little queasily. Alice nodded merrily. "Welcome to Wonderland. It's always tea time here. Let me introduce you," she said, skipping over to the table. "And please don't mind them if they are a little rude until they get to know you, and quite likely for a while after that as well." Tilly followed Alice to the table, not quite believing that she could feel the grass under her feet, and touched the wooden chair she was about to sit down on. "No room, no room," the hare shouted, and Tilly felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Was this the exact scene from the book she'd read so many times? "Why, there's plenty of room," Alice said sternly. "We've been over this before." She nodded encouragingly at Tilly. "Go on, sit down, it's fine." Tilly perched on the edge of the huge squishy cushion covering the chair and smiled nervously at the characters she knew so well, who were now staring at her haughtily. "Would you like some cake?" the Hatter asked, gesturing at the table that was entirely free of anything to eat and held only teapots and teacups. "No, thank you," Tilly said. May I have a cup of tea, please?" "I'm ever so sorry, but we're completely out of tea. So sorry, so sorry. Would you like some wine?" the Hatter said, pouring himself a cup of tea. "I can't drink wine. I'm 11, Tilly said, confused. "I'm ever so sorry," the Hatter replied. "How foolish of me. You are far too old to be drinking wine at tea time." "Too old? Why, yes, one should have long broken the habit of wine drinking if one is already 11. Your discipline is commendable, and we shall all be most inspired by it. Some tea?" he said. "Well, yes, I wanted tea to begin with," Tilly said. "There's no need to be demanding," the Hatter said, filling up a fresh teacup and then drinking it himself. "Do you like riddles?" he asked. "Not particularly," Tilly started. "Wonderful, do tell us some. We love a riddle to ponder over tea." "I'm really sorry, but I don't think I know any riddles," Tilly protested. "Well, make one up," the Hatter said sternly. At that moment, the dormouse woke up. "You stole my butter knife," it squawked before going back to sleep. The hare looked expectantly at Tilly as she racked her brains for any riddles. "Okay, I've got one. What flies without wings?" she said. "Easy," yelled the hare, thumping his paw onto the table and making all the teacups dance and rattle. "Time, and we don't speak of him around these parts. Next, and do try harder with the next one." Tilly desperately tried to remember another riddle. "How about, what belongs to you but others use it more than you do?" The hare paused and stroked his chin. The dormouse woke again. "Teaspoons," he said. "Everyone is always stealing my teaspoons." The hare nodded solemnly. "Yes, teaspoons. These teaspoons belong to me, but are used much more by others, and often used not at all properly." He glared at Alice, who was watching the conversation with delight. "No, the answer isn't teaspoons," Tilly said a little crossly. "The answer is your name. Your name belongs to you, but others use it more than you do." You might as well say your birthday belongs to you, the Hatter chimed in. You may as well claim your age belongs to you, the Dormouse called. My birthday does belong to me, and so does my age, I think. Oh, I'm not at all sure. But you share both with an awful lot of other people, said the Hare. My teaspoons belong only to me, and I would like them all back now, please, he said, and yanked a teaspoon out of Alice's hand as he spoke.
Oh my God, I want to be at that tea party so much.
Like, meant with love, you'd fit right in.
Yeah, I think me and the Hatter have a lot in common.
Yes.
I love that. I wanted to ask you briefly, ideas. We often get told, especially when we're, you know, little and growing up, and certainly before I wrote my first book, if you want to be a writer, keep a notebook, put everything in there. Do you do that? Do you write ideas down and snippets of conversation? Do you?
Yeah. I have.
How nice. You actually do what everybody tells us to do.
These are all used notebooks here. I'm reversed. These are all used notebooks. All here are all used notebooks. And then fresh ones are down here. And I have like 4 on the go on my desk here.
Nice.
And I always have a notebook in my bag. When an idea kind of crystallizes into
I am here.
something specific, or for each page's book, I have a notebook that is specifically for that book or that idea. And then like you'll see this is page, so this, and then they get like this. So this is Pages and Co 4, and this is the one, and this has everything, all my notes, all my ideas as they've started, notes from reading research books, and then it's got printed out notes from my editor. It's got the very beginning of when I was, this is literally, hang on, let's see if this is spoilery. It is a bit, and also it has reference to a character that doesn't exist. Oh no, it's who's become a completely different character, but I do things like put post-its on here and do a little big arc and try and work it out. So yes, I am a big notebook person, and I also like them because then I have each notebook for each book. I can keep it, and it's a nice record of how that book kind of came to be. And I
keep it for the archives. I've managed to find one. I've got one. This says just book 3, and then for some reason I put the date of when I start to plan. And mine is also I tend to write a lot of things on other bits of paper because I never carry my notebook with me, but then I'll stick it in there, and it's just working stuff out. And I think I wish when I had just become or thinking about writing, I wish someone had just told me it doesn't need to be perfect when you start to write. Just aim for imperfection, and just don't worry if it's an absolute mess, and if you don't know who anyone is, and if you read your writing and you're not proud of it, just honestly, please don't worry about any of that, because I think a story is like a magnet, and you need to allow yourself to just be drawn back to it again and again and again. Absolutely. And perfection will never come, but I think the longer you spend on it, the better it will get. So please don't be worried if it's not perfect.
I also, Nikki, that one thing I do a lot when I'm planning as well is I write myself a lot of questions, and I make a list, and if I don't know something, or I think about what a reader would think, like why would that person know to do that? Why is that there? And it's not necessarily the most fun stage, but I do make myself then work through all those questions, and I'm like, and I'm like, I think this, with a series and with something that has magic in it, I think there's a level of this is a necessity for me, because you've got a lot of kind of rules and magic, and I make myself after the first draft. I don't worry about it in the first draft. If the first draft doesn't make sense, that's fine. After the first draft's done and I've spoken to my editor for the first time, and make a list of questions, and I make myself go through the list, and I make myself work it out, and if I can't work it out, then that's an issue. And I don't necessarily enjoy doing that, but I am always really glad that I've done it. And then the other thing I have, which is another thing which I think is particular to magic and series is that I have this very high-tech note. This is essentially a notebook as well, but you'll see
it's like your Bible, isn't it? This,
yeah,
that's where you have everything planned out.
There's so many spoilers here, so this is not really, but you see that it says Pages and Codes of Book Smugglers, key plot magic rules.
Yeah, and then I think that's amazing because like
it's just the magic, but I change it as well as I work it out. You can see things are bold and those are and highlighted, and these are the questions that I still need to work out as I go through it, and I find this hugely useful. One day this will all be in the British Library.
Definitely. Right, so we've got about a minute left, and then we're going to cut to book recommendations and questions. So maybe what should we end on? Just how great it is. Isn't reading cool? Reading and writing, isn't that the best thing in the world?
I mean, it is. I feel books meant everything to me when I was a young person. I grew up in the countryside in a slightly unusual family situation, and books were how I learned that the world was bigger than me and my experiences, and it's how I learned about so many other ways of living and being. And for me to be a writer and to write stories that I hope help other readers have that feeling means the world to me.
Lovely. Yeah, I think what I love so much about books is that they're such a safe space, and I think you can find answers to things and I feel like in real life we're often told what to think and what to say, and there's lots of rules around how we can behave, but I think in books and in stories and in characters that we love, there is so much more freedom there, and you can find a different way of being, as you say, perhaps find the answers.
Yeah,
don't quite know what that means, but it sounds very wise. Right, let's cut to Zoe.
Oh, thank you so much, Nicola and Anna. That was just really lovely to hear more about your books and how you both became writers. It was just, really lovely chat. Right, we've got a ton of questions, which is super exciting. Thank you so much to everybody who has been sending them in. We will try and get through as many as we can, but there's some really brilliant ones there. So I was actually just going to start with this one, just because it made me laugh. And I'd also be quite interested to know the answer to this. And somebody has asked, what do you like to eat whilst you're writing? Do you have a favourite writing snack or...
I don't, obviously I can't really eat at the keyboard because my crumbs will just go everywhere. And honestly, me eating generally is quite a mess. But when I'm working, it's... I think Anna's actually seen me eating spaghetti bolognese in front of the screen, and it was just not pleasant for anyone. But I will drink a lot of tea and coffee. That's me. What about you, Anna? Are you an eater?
No, I don't eat while I'm writing, but what I was grabbing was my timer. So I'm a big devotee of something called the Pomodoro technique. Although I don't do it the right numbers. So the Pomodoro technique is it's called Pomodoro because that's the Italian word for tomato. And there's these it's a timer basically that looks like a tomato, and I think is it 25 minutes? So the Pomodoro technique is basically you work for 25 minutes and then you have a 5-minute break, and then you work for 25 minutes, and that doesn't quite, the principle works. I do it in different times because but so I have a time, this is 15 minutes, and I work for 2 of these, and then I have a snack or a break for 10 to 15 minutes. Or sometimes I do more of these and have a bigger break. So I was just going to, because that's, I don't know if that's a interesting thing for people watching. That's how I write, because I struggle to focus sometimes, and it's so manageable to do a small chunk. You can always write. And I also I've seen in here in my notebook, when I do my first draft and I'm really struggling, I literally tick off every 100 words that I write as a way to motivate myself.
Oh, nice one. That's really clever.
Every 100 words. This is 20,000 words to 25,000 words, and I write every 100 and I cross them off because you can, the thing is, it's intimidating writing a whole book, but you can always write another 100 words. You can always work for another 15 minutes.
True.
I really use that to keep myself going and not feel intimidated by the whole task. But I massively reward myself with snacks.
Yeah.
I have a very...
I quite like a nut. Like I'll have, like, if I've got a little packet of nuts, sometimes, because they're quite easy to just, you know, shove them into my mouth like a bird. Like a bird, I suppose.
Very healthy too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have a huge sweet tooth, and I almost entirely eat chocolate biscuits as snacks. But I'm also a fan of a bagel.
Very nice.
There you go. That's a very long-winded answer to that.
No, that was brilliant, and lots of great tips for any budding writers as well. So somebody from St. Francis School has asked, how did you feel when your first book was published? You can both answer that one.
Yeah, just amazing. I mean, I think really, really amazing. The first time you hold your first book, it's like, depending on how long you've wanted to be a writer, but it's like your childhood dream, and you're holding it in your hands, and it's you know, it's nearly as good as the day I gave birth to my daughter. Nearly as good, I'd say. Yeah. Have I just made you cry? Has that been the most emotional thing you've ever heard, Anna?
I'm afraid that wasn't a tear. No.
I was like, oh my God.
I felt, honestly, it's surreal. It was very surreal, and I feel like still sometimes when I see my books on a bookshop shelf, and I'm like, I know that that's my name, and I know that I spent years writing that, but it still, there's like a slight disconnect sometimes in my brain. Like I find it very surreal still that I wrote them. Once they're like printed and in a shop, I sometimes I find it very surreal, but it was amazing. Yeah, I cried at my launch party. I didn't cry when I held my book for the first time.
Oh, speaking of daughters, I just want to, I'm not going to say hello to her, obviously, because that'll be really embarrassing, but hello to Golden Eagle and Mr. Riley. Hello. Right, we've got 95 questions to get through.
I know, there's so many.
Great, speedy.
Right, we're going to jump to another one. I just saw a really brilliant one. So this is from Bridge Primary School, and somebody there has asked, which settings in your books would you most like to visit?
Pages and Co, the bookshop. It's not the most magical, but it's my ideal bookshop, and one day I'm going to make Pages and Co a real bookshop.
For me, I think I've done it really. I think with Starboard, the ship is the setting, and it's an entire galaxy in itself, and I have visited it.
Brilliant. So if you weren't an author, what do you think you would be?
I'd be trying to become an author.
I would probably still be a journalist. I still do freelance journalism, books journalism. I write about books and theatre, and I really love it. I love interviewing authors, and I found it a hugely creative and intellectually satisfying job that I still do and don't want to stop doing. So I would still be doing that, I imagine.
Lovely. So quite a few people have asked, what are your favourite books, the children's books that you like to read?
Oh, who wants to answer first?
I'll go quick. I'm trying to be really speedy. Okay, so my favourites from when I was a child are Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery, Charmed Life by Diana Wynne Jones, and Momo by Michael Ende. Recent favourite books are When You Reach Me by Rebecca Stead, Rooftopers by Catherine Rundle, and then more recently I've really enjoyed Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston.
When I was a child, I loved all the Garfield books, 100%. My favourite children's books were Harriet the Spy by Louise Fitzhugh, which I still return to again and again. And recently, I've really enjoyed Clock of Stars by Francesca Gibbons and Orphans of the Tide by Sharon Murray.
Lovely. They were super speedy. So we've had a book recommendation request, and this is from Mrs. Piercy or somebody in their class, and they've asked, can you recommend any books that are about the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages?
Oh my goodness, yes, we can. This is a bit of an annoying one because it hasn't come out yet, but it comes out in September. I've just read it. This is my pile of books I've read this month. And this is the proof cover, and I think it's got the, yeah, that's what it's going to look like. This is the Dark Ages, right? This is like
Yes, I think so. It's kind of,
I
yeah.
think near enough, because there's not actually a lot of books, I think, set a real children's book set a really long time ago. That's what it's going to look like. It's called Fireborn. And it's by Aisling Fowler, and it is a super exciting, fast-paced adventure book about a girl who becomes a huntling after her family is killed, and she has to go and live at this hunting lodge, and she sets off on a quest to find a missing girl. And it's got kind of monsters and adventures, and it's set in a fantasy version of the Starboard, I believe. But also Caroline Lawrence writes brilliant historical books set in all sorts of different time periods, and I'm pretty sure. And then what's that one that came out recently?
Is it The Wild Way Home?
Yeah, Sophie Kirtley.
Yeah, but I think that's prehistoric, so that's kind of caveman era. So that's perhaps going back a bit too back in our time machine. So right, next question, go.
Next question.
Right. God, get through this quickly. So, what do you do if you get stuck whilst you're writing?
I have no. Oh man, it's difficult. I sometimes will go for a walk, but sometimes you just have to push through that wall, and just don't get your bum off the seat. I heard an amazing quote that said, "Don't wait for inspiration. Inspiration's waiting for you." So I think you just have to stay in your desk. Don't quit when it's tough.
I'd say I use a mixture of, like, I mentioned the kind of practical tips that I use, because I find that I'm like, I can always write something. I think, like, again, echoing what Nicola says, just write something. It doesn't matter if it's not good. But one thing I sometimes do as well is we talked about being visual people. I use Pinterest a lot. I have a lot of Pinterest boards for my books. They're all private. You can't find them. But sometimes if I'm stuck, what I'll do is I'll just pick something that I find like an inspiring image, and I'll just literally describe it. I'll just write it in words. And sometimes by doing that, I find my way into a story. I pick a setting that I know I want to do something with, and I might not know what wants to happen, but I can literally just describe it. I can just write it, and then that's a way. I also use a lot of music. I listen to film soundtracks, and I find that they get me in the zone.
Nice. Are there any more book recommendations? I want to get one.
Oh, I will have a little look through. I'll do another question first, and I'll have another little scan for recommendations. So another really good question from Torbridge Primary School, and somebody has asked, would you rather meet your favourite book character or your favourite author?
Book character.
I suppose you probably do get to meet a lot of your favourite authors.
Yes, I would say that literally, obviously, my books are about how much I would like to, basically I want to meet Anne Shirley. I want to be friends with Anne of Green Gables. I also think that I am fortunate that I know a lot of authors. Also, real people are more unpredictable than fictional characters. Probably your fictional characters, they are what they mean to you, and I don't think they could ever disappoint you. And most authors I've met have been absolutely wonderful people. But I think
the problem with meeting other authors is that sometimes you get jealous, because you'll be like, oh my gosh, is that how you plan your book? Oh, you use the Pomodoro method. Oh, you sound really organized. Whereas you don't get that with characters. But that's a really good question. I can't answer that, I think. Sorry.
Okay, next question. So somebody has asked, can you give us any tips on how to write a book and how not to put the entire story in one chapter?
That's an amazing question. Yeah, I think that I've read a lot of drafts where there's so much information packed into the first chapter, and you just kind of go, whoa, just slow it down. And I think if you really tell it from the point of view of the character in that first chapter, and just drill it down, what is that character seeing and thinking and doing? And only tell it from that point of view. Speaking of other authors, Francesca Gibbons, who wrote Clock of Stars, she read my first chapter of the book I'm currently writing. She gave me an amazing piece of advice, which just said, I would favour action over explanation. If you have to prioritise one, always go with the action. Don't feel you have to explain everything, because readers quite like not knowing everything all at once. What would you say?
I think that's True. I remember when I was writing when I was younger, I used to do this all the time, and that was something it's a really familiar problem. I think, echoing what Nicola said, I think that, you know, you should learn about the story as the character does, and you should learn about it not because someone, obviously sometimes you have to do some telling, but think about how you can get that stuff across without just explicitly explaining it. So if you want to explain that, say, for example, you're setting your story in like a fantasy world that's very scary, rather than explaining the world and describing it and saying why it's scary, maybe think about a scene that could happen that demonstrates it's scary. So instead of saying this world exists and this scary thing is in it, what would happen if your character encountered that scary thing? And so you're showing the reader that it's scary rather than telling them. So I always try to think, if I feel like I'm just putting on a load of information at the start, I try to think, how can I show the reader this without telling them it? How can they see it because it's happening? So yeah.
That's really great writing advice. Thank you. So we've had a couple more recommendation requests. So firstly, from Holy Rosary School, they have asked for books about mythical things, demons, monsters, any of those kind of things.
Monsters. Oh, what about Crater Lake by Jennifer Killick? I feel that's, I read half of that with my daughter. That's really funny, and it has, I think it definitely has a few monsters in it, and also there's quite a few monsters in Clock of Stars by Francesca Gibbons.
You're a fan of that book, Nicola?
Hey?
You're a fan of that book?
If I like a book, I really like it.
Do they say mythical creatures?
Yes, mythical things, demons.
I just read, this is, again, I'm going to knock this over. This isn't the finished cover, obviously, so this isn't a knock, but I just read Children of the Quicksands by Efwa Traore, and this is, I loved reading this. This is set in Nigeria, and it's about a girl who lives in Lagos, in a city in Nigeria, and she has to go and live with her grandma in a village. And it's about Yoruba myths and the goddesses of that mythology, and it's very present, and it's very real, and it's about city living versus kind of rural living, and Yoruba myths and Yoruba goddesses.
That sounds really good.
Not so much monsters, but it's the kind of mythology element.
What's it called again? Sorry.
Children of the Quicksands.
Children of the Quicksands. And also Otherland by Louis Stowell, which came out about a month ago. Has mythical kind of fairies. Yes, that's it. But the fairies are quite dark, and that's really good. So I really enjoyed that.
Lovely. And just to quickly say, this event is being recorded and it will be on our YouTube, so don't worry about scribbling every recommendation down, because you'll be able to watch this back and hear them all again. Right, some other requests. So Mrs. Piercy has asked for any mystery books you really love.
Mystery.
So mine would go to Shana Jackson first, who writes the High Rise Mysteries. They're absolutely brilliant. They're about two sisters who live in a high rise and investigate a murder that's happened. There's 2 books in the series, and they're very much, if you've enjoyed Robin Stevens' Murder Most Unladylike series, I definitely recommend Shana Jackson.
Brilliant shout. Yeah, what she said.
Lovely. I also love Shana Jackson as well. That's a really good recommendation. Do you have any funny books that you would like to recommend?
Oh yeah, I love a funny book. I really loved Wed Wabbit by Lisa Evans, which is just hilarious. And Jay Pearson writes a lot of good funny books, doesn't she? Maz Evans. Who else?
That's a good selection. I want to make sure we get to as many as possible.
Yeah.
So another recommendation request, just looking through these very quickly. So somebody has asked for books set in a rainforest, but I might make that a little bit broader and say books set in a jungle setting, or anything kind of like that, or a forest, anything kind of immersed in nature.
Well, there's the Explorer by Catherine Rondell, which is set in the Amazon rainforest, which is just amazing. One of the best books ever. I love it so much.
Wonderful work. Yeah.
October by Katya Balin. Has the main character there. Do you know what? That just came to me and I hadn't even written it down. And that's really good because the main character in that, she starts as a very wild kind of forest dwelling child, and then she gets pulled into London, I think, and she kind of struggles with that. That's a brilliant book.
Yeah. Also, do you know what else has a great forest setting? It's A Clock of Stars.
Yeah, I didn't want to say it.
But it does. But yeah, if you want jungle specifically, The Explorer is definitely the place to start.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you so much. I think that is probably all the time we have for questions, but we've had over 100, which is so amazing. And we're really sorry we couldn't get around to all of them, but hopefully you got really good suggestions from the other ones that were answered. And thank you so much for everybody who shared their questions. So we're going to wrap up in just a couple of minutes, but before we do that, we ran a book giveaway for 2 schools who attended this event. And I'm very excited to announce who those schools are, and they will be receiving copies of either Anna's or Nicola's books. So first of all, we have Broke Hall Community Primary School, and they'll be receiving copies of Tilly and the Mapper Stories. And then we also have South Shore Academy, and they'll be receiving copies of Starboard. So congratulations to both of you. Your teachers or librarians will be contacted over the next few days, and those books will be on their way to you in the post. So thank you so much to everybody who has joined us this morning. We really hope that you enjoyed hearing from Anna and Nicola. Tilly and the Mapper Stories and Starboard are both published by HarperCollins, and they are both available to buy online in bookshops, or they can be borrowed from your local library or from your school library if you're lucky enough to have copies of them. If teachers and librarians would like to find out more about our 2 lovely authors, they can visit their websites, which are anna-james.com and nicola-skinner.com. If you'd like to find out how to win books for your school's book club, you can sign up to our Chatterbooks newsletter at chatterbooks.org.uk. And finally, children can take part in the Summer Reading Challenge over the summer holidays by signing up at summerreadingchallenge.org.uk. And we'll be sending around all this information in a follow-up email, so you'll have all the kind of useful links you might need. So I guess all that's left to say is thank you so much, Nicola and Anna, for joining us today. It was such a lovely discussion, and I'm sure all our schools were very excited to hear from you. And
thank you. On my website there's a contact form, and if people didn't have questions answered, I am very happy for people to send questions via the contact form. I'm more likely to get back to you via that than Twitter and social media, which I'm a little bit sporadic on, so you can contact me on my website if you have any burning questions that you didn't get answered.
Thank you, Anna. And yeah, thank you so much, both of you. And thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Have a brilliant rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.